All the roads are windy.
Welcome to the show, Megan. It's super exciting to have you here, and I really love your art and your process from what I've seen about it through the gram and through your website. And so I'm excited to dive in today and just get to learn some more. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Totally. So before we begin, would you like to lead a little invocation just to set the energy of this space?
Yeah, I would love to. I kind of came up with an idea. I don't know if this has been done here before, but so for anyone who's listening in, if you have a moment to just pause, collect yourself, take a deep breath, and when doing a little body scan, think about the clothing that you're wearing, something that we carry with us every day, all the time. It's a huge part of our identity. And for most of us, we don't have any relation to how that clothing is made. We just see it completed on the rack somewhere. And so just slow down, think about how it feels. And if you know what your clothing is made of, think of what those plants or animals are that contributed to those garments. Um, and if you didn't intentionally shop for something that was plant or animal based, you're probably wearing polyester somewhere on your body too. And I also just want to, speak to that. We can be in relationship to all the types of clothing and fibers that we wear. And what a lot of people don't realize is that polyester, if you're wearing that, is actually very, very old plant and animal matter too. So it comes from oil, and a long time ago, before there were microbes to decompose the plant and animal matter, as they died and fell on the surface of the earth, it just accumulated over time and eventually was deeply compressed. And that's the polyester that you're wearing now on your body. So I just wanted to speak to all of that, whether you have something like wool or silk or hemp or bamboo on your body. We can give thanks to those beings in this lifetime who contributed to those garments. And if you're wearing polyester, we can also give thanks to the very, very old beings that came up out of the earth and contributed to those garments. So yeah, that's just something I wanted people to think about. Like, we have a relationship with the food we eat, the medicine we take, the water we drink, and our clothes are a part of that cycle too. Our clothes come from the earth too. And so we can be intentional and conscious about the garments we wear and grateful for the abundance of this earth and what it provides for us to adorn our bodies.
Thank you for that. I love that. I love that ancient connection to the animals and plants that became the oils and things that it's so psychedelic sounding. Like we're wearing like dinosaur age stuff right now.
We are like, and I feel like, it's such a complex topic, and there can be a lot of shame and guilt around purchasing those items. And I'm not here to like smooth over that or provide easy answers. But that doesn't mean that we can't just accept the reality of our situation and at the same time know what went into those garments and still give our thanks for them. So,
Hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. And it is the thing, like I've hardly ever seen naked people in public. Like clothes are such a huge part of our life. And it's, yeah, there's so much. Okay. Wow. I'm excited to get into this. Okay. Thanks for that. So, who are your ancestors? Like what lineages do you come from?
I don't know a ton of details. I feel like the same as a lot of people who live in America, from immigrants from the 17 and 1800s, and really didn't learn anything about it from my parents, but thanks to like the modern world and ancestry.com, was able to do my own research. So on my mother's side, her ancestors are from England, Belgium, and Germany. And on my father's side, they're from Scotland and Ireland. So, and my mother's family immigrated to Toledo, Ohio, the Northwest Ohio area, and my father's family was in the Appalachian region since 1700s, and was in Eastern Kentucky, and then eventually immigrated up to Ohio for better jobs and quality of life, and that's how my parents met. So yeah, that's the ancestry that I know of.
Wow, that's amazing and deep Appalachian roots. And where do you live now? And who are the people of that land?
Yeah, so I've lived in Tennessee for the last 5 to 6 years, and I've lived in a couple different parts of Tennessee, but um, I'm moving back to Eastern Tennessee in a few weeks, and so that's what I wanted to speak about, the history of Eastern Tennessee and the original stewards of the land there. So, to my knowledge, the oldest stewards of the land of Eastern Tennessee, they first lived here 12 to 15,000 years ago after the last ice age. And most of our knowledge of the indigenous people that lived here before European settlers came, unfortunately, comes from, the records of colonizers. And uh, there actually was a lot of different groups of people who lived in Eastern Tennessee, but we don't have that much information on who all was there, especially because when the first colonizers came through in the 15 to 1600s, they spread disease, and a lot of those people were wiped out. So, as more and more Europeans moved in, at the same time, a lot of the indigenous population had been wiped out. And the Cherokee people moved into Eastern Tennessee at that time and really settled all over Eastern Tennessee. And so, from that point until now, in the current day, about 25,000 people of Cherokee descent still live in Tennessee. So I think they're considered the original stewards. But I just wanted to kind of speak to the even longer history since there were lots of other people. And one of the things that I learned about, I was researching about the name history of Tennessee, like where did this word come from? Since so many states and cities are actually, they come from indigenous words and names, which is the case for Tennessee. There was a group, one of the earliest known tribes in the pre-Cherokee era, called the Yuchi people, and they had a word Tanasi, and that was basically learned by the Europeans, and then it was originally what they called the Tennessee River, the Tanasi River, and the state of Tennessee is named after that river. So that's how the name came to be.
Wow, thanks for that. I love little I'm like, bringing the history today. It's fun. I would go to your history classes. This is really fun. Cool. Thanks for that. Do you happen to know, I know that a lot of meanings of indigenous languages are lost. Do you happen to know what that word means or meant to?
So I was researching like about the word, and they really don't, it's kind of like been lost in, at least, from what I was able to research on the internet, not really being a scholar. But from what I read, there was a town called Tanasi, and it might have been kind of a reflective term like the people of Tanasi or something like that. And then that name was adopted to the nearby river. But that's about as much as I could learn. So, yeah.
All right, cool. Anyone who's got the deep knowledge, hit us up.
Yeah, I would love to know.
That's awesome. Wow, well, thanks for that. So, uh, something that, really attracted us to your work is that you are someone who embodies the belief of the sentience of nature. And it's not, the trees and the elements and the animals and plants are all just more than just be like physical things, they're beings. Do you want to just tell us more about what that means to you? Like describe it for yourself, and when did you first kind of realize this was your belief?
Yeah. um, so I definitely was not raised in that way, or raised to think that way, or look at the natural world around me in that way at all. When I was in my mid 20s, I my husband and I, my now husband and I, actually were living off grid in Southeast Ohio, which is part of the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of people don't realize that. But, and so we were living on a big piece of property there. And I wasn't working. I was just like homesteading there. And so I had a lot of time alone to myself and would walk the woods a lot. And it was also a time where I was trying to quit drinking and was still in, the process of working through that. And that was something that was really heavy on my heart at the time. And being out there and walking in the woods and having an interest in homesteading kind of led me to learn and realize, oh wow, there's all these plants out here that have uses and medicinal qualities and things, something I had never really been exposed to. And so I became really interested in identifying plants, and going out to hike and try to find them and see what I could see. And really came at it just from this, there's a mentality of like, what can I use this for? Kind of was just, that was all I knew or saw in a book. But then it really changed for me. Like I didn't end up going down that route. Like I didn't end up just like extracting plants for use. I kind of just became more obsessed with meeting them really and seeing them. And, I felt really lucky to be in woods that were relatively like untouched for a couple decades. And so I had, the privilege of finding really big patches of trillium flowers and Dutchman's breeches and things like that, and a lot of woodland flowers. And it was just totally like, many times I was like literally brought to tears in the woods, and can't even explain, like I felt like a childlike joy and wonder discovering them, a plant I had only read about and then seeing it. And it was really amazing. And honestly, like seeing those plants and being able to meet them in the woods helped me almost like wake up again to the world, and really helped me move forward in my decision to quit drinking and coping with these substances. It kind of gave me this sense of like, there is so much more out there to feel and experience and be alive for. And just, yeah. So that was kind of the initial thing. Like it sort of happened by accident to me. Like I wasn't intending to go out there and feel that or experience that, but it happened. And, yeah. And so that was it was initially just a very personal thing for me. And then as I got back into my artwork and started embroidering, which I did basically because I was living off grid and it was an easy art to do without, electricity. I naturally started like wanting to incorporate those plants into that. So that was kind of like the roots of that, if that answers your question.
Totally. And if you're willing to, I mean, no pressure at all, but what kind of relationship did you have with alcohol? Were you like an alcoholic, or was it just kind of like a couple drinks a week and you're just like, I'm done. Like, this is not helping me. Like, what was that level of alcohol consumption?
Yeah. So, it was very much like, I really would say that I was someone who self-medicated, and I did drink every day, and I did drink every day for probably 7 years, and definitely was in a mind state where like if we would travel or I would be somewhere unusual, like I would have anxiety that I wouldn't be able to have that at the end of the day, I never was one to like really get drunk or anything like that. But it was just something I basically did, alone, and was really my way to regulate my nervous system. Something I now know and am informed about, that I didn't have the tools or the understanding to be with my own uncomfortable emotions or self-regulate or even know how to reach out for co-regulation. And those were all things that I had to learn, in the aftermath of leaving alcohol behind. So for me, it was like the best tool that I had at the time to help me with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to put it, because it is definitely a tool, for that regulation. And I think in the pandemic especially, people have been feeling kind of, turning to substances, or I don't know, all kinds of different things. So like we've been through a really intense experience. And if you don't know how to self-regulate or co-regulate your nervous system, and if you don't have that kind of support, then, we just aren't taught this as, growing up. It's not something that's like, hey kids, here's how to regulate your nervous system. We're just like thrown into this world of just absolute chaos sometimes, and then have to figure it out ourselves. So, if you're willing, just for someone out there who might be really resonating with this, what else helped you like learn these things? Like helped you really find a way to manage or move through those emotions and those tough experiences, and to do that nervous system regulation without turning to alcohol?
Yeah, wow. It's definitely been a journey. Like I'm coming up now on 4 years not drinking. So at this point it feels like such a long time, and but I would say for the first 2 years, like I didn't know. Like I basically was able to stop drinking. And then I was like, oh, I can function, I can go. But I was actually like working like 12 to 14-hour days and was like coping by being like this total go, go, go workaholic who probably was just, constantly experiencing a fight or flight state is how I feel now looking back on it. And I really didn't know, I didn't know I was in that state or that there was another way to be. And it actually, ended up having a series of like traumatic events in one summer 2 years ago, and it led to me developing this abdominal pain that I didn't know what it was. I ended up, as many people have had this experience, going to a number of doctors, and no one could tell me what, and I had misdiagnoses and all of this. So I ended up, figuring out on my own that it was digestive, and through eliminating certain things from my diet was able to basically manage that pain and reduce that pain. But going through that process over 6 to 8 months, I ended up, basically deep diving into like reading the book The Body Keeps the Score, and learning all about that, and just starting to try to inform myself about trauma and the nervous system, and kind of realize, oh my gosh, I have been living every day with such a high state of generalized anxiety and stress that I'm killing myself, you know? Truly, like I felt like this is the worst thing I could do. If I want to be in good health, I have to tend to that. And so that was really the initiator. Like, even though I got sober and did certain things that were supportive of that, it took me a couple years to really realize the depth of what I needed to do. And so obviously after that happened, I was really focused on my health and made a lot of changes in my life that just removed certain things where I was like, that has to go, this has to go, I can't take on everything and more. And basically since then have kind of had that mindset that I'm always sort of prioritizing and looking at my life, and just keeping what's worth keeping, you know what I mean? So yeah, and following lots of different accounts on Instagram has been really helpful in just learning more about attachment styles. Has been like life changing for me actually to learn about, and it's something that I really have gone through just in the last 8 months becoming a mom. That's been a huge thing. So yeah, it's been interesting. Like I feel like I've had to move also in not just the drinking, but then learning about attachment styles and all of these things, kind of having to shift from this mindset that I'm assume was conditioned and learned through society or my family who maybe didn't know better, but to kind of have so much like shame and guilt over my inability to self-regulate, or inability to cope, or just my shortcomings. And I kind of had this big shift actually a few months after my son was born. My sister and I started kind of like weekly or bi-weekly having like these phone therapy sessions together, basically like accountability. And it was totally life changing for us because we were talking about things we had never really opened up to each other about before. And we realized, oh my gosh, we struggle with so many of the same things. And for me, it was such an opportunity to like move out of that place of fear about who I was or my limitations and move into this space of like, oh, my environment has shaped me. And that's why I am the way that I am. And at the same time, knowing that is so empowering because now I feel like I have the ability to change that, So I feel like so much of the changes for me were about my mindset and that inner voice. And, another lesson really was, I would have probably a year ago heard somebody say, oh, you've got to have a positive inner voice. And I would have been like, yeah, of course I do. Like, of course I'm positive about myself. But the reality was, I learned after having my son and going through all those changes and starting to talk with my sister, I realized, well, if I was having a totally positive inner voice, I don't think I would be going through the dark night of the soul that I'm going through right now. So that was even like another thing 3 years after quitting drinking that I still was working through. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. This I hear so much of your story that resonates for me, just, different ways. And I think it resonates for a lot of people. And especially, you mentioned the body keeps the score, which is deeply rooted in somatics. And, you mentioned this, uncovering trauma and how to regulate and all these things and like how you didn't even know that this was happening. And like this mirrors my story as well. Like I've spent most of my life thinking that I was just I was just constantly fatigued and exhausted and like depressed. But actually I was in dorsal vagal shutdown, which is like a whole term from the polyvagal thing and learning how to come out of that has been life changing. And it's been through connecting with the body and connecting with exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, just thanks for sharing that story. I feel like we're all so in it that we don't even know how to see it until someone lays it out for us. Like, oh, this is how it's happening in attachment styles. And like, if you don't get your needs met, you might have this kind of response and da 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 da. Like, I mean, we're not, this podcast isn't all about getting into that, but like for anyone listening, like definitely go investigate that polyvagal and trauma healing and somatics. It's like, so that's huge. And yeah, thanks for sharing your story. I think that's kind of a story that a lot more people have than even gets talked about, especially on like socials. It's like we're not out there talking about like I had all this trauma and like I quit drinking and like that, it's like not our everyday thing. We have like at Earthspeak we talk about specific things, but behind those stories is like we are all, especially people who are so sensitive and so connected to the earth and intuition. Like a lot of times we got that way because we had to be so hyper aware from the experiences we had in our childhood that led to these dysregulated coping mechanisms. So yeah, so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I try to share about it from time to time on social media. I um just recently did a live Q&A on my Patreon where somebody was asking about, tools and in quitting smoking or drinking. And I like to talk about it and be available because like you said, it's something that people don't always talk about. And I just, I don't necessarily love the term normalizing things, but I do kind of want to normalize it. Like I'm not ashamed of it. Like it's a big part of my story. And I don't look back on it with like shame, you know what I mean? Like in the sense that I said, like alcohol was a tool for me. It was the best tool I had. I mean, I even feel emotional. Like I'm so grateful. I really needed that at times, So I feel like it's important to think about one thing that's been good for me is like, how do we tell the stories that we tell ourselves? Like we get to choose how our story sounds and what we tell ourselves every day. And it can be really life changing if you can shift subtle things like how you talk about that, the mindset that a lot of people have about being dependent on alcohol seems so scary that a lot of people are so trapped in never quitting because they're too afraid to even admit that it's not really serving them, and it took me seeing women on social media who just happened to mention in a post that they were alcohol free. And I was like, they were like thriving. They were women I admired. And I was like, how can this be? Like, because it's so normal in our culture. You just assume they're perfect. They can have a glass of wine when they want. You know what I mean? And the little things like that just totally opened up the possibilities for me. And so I love now being where I am. Like, I feel a responsibility to be like, maybe you're sitting where I sat. And I hope that I can be someone who can be on the other side and show you like just how beautiful and freeing it can be. And that you deciding it no longer serves you does not have to be a place of shame for you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And like maybe normalizing, you could say like taking away the stigma too. Like there's so much stigma, and I think just taking that away and the shame and all that, yeah, really powerful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So something else I want to talk about, obviously, is your art and how, you mentioned you had been embroidering and that just being on that land and homesteading and getting into form relationships with these plants started to inform your art. And now it's evolved into you make a full-time living as this, really conscious, collaborative, slow clothing creator. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about where did it jump from embroidery to making clothes? Like what happened there?
Yeah. So I started embroidering. I had always done art as a kid, and in high school, I was in the AP art classes, but I didn't go to college or any like secondary education. I was working in restaurants and have done basically work service jobs until I started doing this work. And so it was really, it totally coincided with me getting sober and connecting more with the land. I was getting back in touch with creating art again, and started with the embroidering. And I was embroidering on clothing, like I was embroidering hats and dresses and things like that. And so I loved it. I did it for like a year. I was embroidering crazy hours, like so much embroidering was happening, truly. Like I would wake up, embroider, go to bed, wake, that was it. My whole life I was like, this is amazing. But eventually I reached a point where I was like, okay, if I really want this to be my livelihood, I probably need to explore some other options, because embroidering is really slow work. And what you would really, in my opinion, need to charge per an item is just not affordable for most people. And I wanted to be able to, not just have to sell my items to a really exclusive group of people who could afford something like that, but appeal to like a broader audience. So embroidering on the clothes led to me thinking, well, what else can I do with clothing? And yeah, it kind of went from there, where I just started experimenting with block printing on fabric and doing patches and doing tees and sweatshirts, and eventually moving on to linen clothing. And now obviously I work with all sorts of fibers and fabrics and things like that. But yeah, that was the initial. And I think I just um, loved doing the clothing, because I feel like as soon as I started doing those pieces, the feedback that I got from people was really awesome. Like, there's something really special about buying a piece of clothing. The I want to say like self-transformation potential. Like, people buy a piece of clothing from me because they're very intentional about what they want to experience wearing it, or how they want, what they want to bring into their life and into their identity, or at a special pivotal moment in their life to mark a change or a shift. And I just feel like it's so special to be able to create pieces like that, that get to be worn on our bodies and carried with us. So I've always really stuck with the clothing and have loved doing that.
Cool. And then when you are creating a piece nowadays, how does that process begin? And I imagine there's many starting points. So, I was reading on your website and I've been following you on the gram for a while now. So I know that like when you create, you're working with many people and who do different parts and it's a slow process. So can you just kind of lay that out first? Like, and not just physically, but, like, energetically too, like, what are your intentions going into it, and what is slow clothing, This is so different from going to, I don't know, just a big box store and buying a $7 shirt that, it's just a completely different process.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be kind of a long reply. Is that okay?
Hey, that's what we're here for.
Okay. So the first thing I want to mention is that, before mass consumerism and mass production and going to the store and seeing hundreds and thousands of things on racks ready to buy, before all of that, the majority of clothing and possessions that people had, they probably knew um, who made them, or who was involved in the making, maybe even where the fibers came from. Like there was a story, and it was probably intentionally made or gifted for them or something they saved up for. Like there was so much more of a story with each item that people owned, and we really lost that, obviously, um, over the last couple centuries. And for me, I feel, one thing that I really love about my work is that I feel like I'm reconnecting with that, and that to work with fiber and work with textiles and work with um imagery and symbolism and things like that is something that basically we have record of humans doing it for tens of thousands of years. And so I feel like what I'm doing is one of the oldest things, a really ancient thing that humans have done for and with each other. And so like for me, that's really kind of how I feel about my work at its simplest, like the idea of me working with things myself or with a group of other people to create a finished product for someone that they really intentionally buy. Like that's the root of it, and then from there it expands to um, obviously I try to incorporate using natural fibers, things that will decompose, things that are better for the environment. Um, Anything that we dye right now, like in house, is botanically dyed. So we use plant matter for that. And yeah, so I guess it'll make sense. So when I originally started, I didn't, have all these connections and all these people I was collaborating with. It was just me. I just would buy what I could, or what people pre-ordered from me, and then I would block print it in my house, myself by hand. And then as that expanded, I started meeting all these amazing people through my work, basically, people buying from me, following me on Instagram, and started sending things to dye artists to be dyed and working with different sewists to sew custom garments. And then eventually over in the last year and a half, hiring a couple people who work with me and help me block print. So now that's kind of a team of all of these people. There are people who sew, there are people who dye, and people who block print. Um, and my whole focus in starting to collaborate with other people and hiring people really was like, I felt super grateful and blessed to be able to never go back to a service job. That was such a win for me. Especially as, like you mentioned, being a sensitive person, it's been such a safe haven to leave that. And so my focus in working with people, and one thing that I think and hope makes Sister Nettle unique, is that when someone collaborates with Sister Nettle or works with me, I always come from a place of like asking them, what is it that you want to be doing? And it can be really specific. And it's not just like, oh, I want to be sewing. It might be like, what type of items do you want to be sewing? Or what type of plants do you want to be dyeing with? Like we're really intentional about what it is they want to do. Like I try to incorporate that, and we'll shift my perspective, my projects, like what we create. If I'm working with somebody who really wants to sew with a certain fabric or create something, if I'm able to, like, I'll adjust my vision to incorporate that, because I really want the people who are involved, like, I want them to be wanting to do that. I don't want it to just be something they clock in for, and hopefully it's worth what they're getting paid. That's not the attitude I want. It's like, we're making these garments. It's not fulfilling like a need per se. It's not like growing food. It's, you know, a privilege for people to buy these garments. And so I just feel like, why would we make them if everyone involved wasn't coming from a place of loving what they're doing in the process of making it? So, yeah, so that's kind of the intention that I have in all those relationships and working with people. I really come at it from an angle, like, a lot of times before I'll even reach out to someone about collaborating, I like to like, not like creepily, but I like to watch them on Instagram and see what they're doing and see what they like, so that when I'm like, hey, I have this idea and I think it would be really aligned with what you seem to love doing. I don't want to just go to a ceramic artist or go to a dye artist and ask them to do something completely different from what they seem to be called to do, you know? So that's all kind of the behind the scene things that people don't always see or know about. But I do feel like the intention of that shows up in our work, and people who follow along see that that's happening, and it makes the pieces special. So I feel like I got kind of off track there, but I hope that I answered that question.
Yeah, totally. It totally answered it. And I'd love to get into some of like the energetics and magic behind it, and like what kind of um what are you calling in, or what kind of spirits or beings are you connecting with in this process as well? I mean, for anyone watching the video, they can see behind you these beautiful hand block printed dresses with all these beautiful symbols, and yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll talk about these dresses because I'm very excited about this project that I've got going on. But for more of a general answer, um, I so I feel like a lot of my design ideas and things just, I'm sure lots of people have their own way of explaining this, but the ideas just like pop in my head. I don't necessarily think I thought of this. Like, I think of it more like it is like receiving something or a download. Like, I'll literally sometimes just lay down in bed and I'll have this create, like, I'll lay there and in 20 minutes, like, I'll get like 5 ideas and just hop out of bed, sketch them out of nowhere, and then I'll be like, great, now I have all my ideas for the spring. And so some things come to me that way. Like, I just feel like I receive them. And so I think a lot about the way that I create stuff, less of like, it's me and it's my idea and it's my message or anything. But I feel like I'm more like a conduit, like a person who is working with the themes and energies and needs of my customers and the people who follow me, and maybe what's just going on in the world, and being someone who tries to be in tune with all of that. And on social media, asking a lot. Like, I do a lot of things in my stories, asking people where they're at, what's going on for them, or if you're working through grief, what kind of plants come up for you. Those things are really directive for me in my work. And I really feel like I try to create like for the collective in that way. Like, it's less, sometimes things are really personal for me, of course, but for a lot of my pieces, I think of it more like that. So these dresses are called the Infinity Slip Dress. And they're like a brand new project that I started this fall. And basically the inspiration came from, in archaeological digs, when human burials are found, a lot of times they have these grave goods with them, right? Which is these precious possessions that they were buried with, whether it's jewelry, some of it's lost, obviously, like if it was a textile, it's decomposed, but we'll see, metals and bones and things like that they've held on to. And so the inspiration for this dress was basically for me to block print a collection of grave goods, like things that you are meaningful to you and that you want to carry with you always, and maybe even from this life into the next. And so the first dress I created for myself, with my ideas and my imagery, and then this batch that I've been working on, basically someone bought a dress, like each person bought a dress, and they sent me a list choosing from some of the imagery that I offered, but they also got to submit their own requests. So like each one has something custom carved just for them that they wanted on their dress. And then the placement of all the pieces is like different for every dress and intuitive based on what they chose. And it's actually been really fun because I didn't know if people would be on board with it or not, but I was like, if you want to send me music or any intentions that you have, like send me that and I'll be thinking about them and listening to the music while I'm laying out this design and printing the dress. And people were just, it was the coolest thing ever. Like, if you ever think that your job is becoming monotonous or something, like this was so revitalizing for me. And we basically have been excited and moved to tears with the things people have shared, and listening to these awesome playlists that they, crafted for me to listen to while printing the dresses. And yeah, it's been really, really awesome. So one of the things that I feel like goes on kind of in a lot of our projects is there'll be a similarity. You can look at these dresses and see it's like the same item in a sense, but because we do them in such a custom way, like they really are individual to each person.
They're so pretty. I'm just really loving looking, like there's a snake, a candle, mushrooms, bee comb, spider webs, infinity symbols. So cool. And then is that something that people, is that like a limited time thing? Or if someone's listening and they're interested in this, can they still like order this and collaborate?
My best advice would be to sign up for my email list. I always send out an email, usually like once a month. I'm not like
Mhm.
a crazy, email person, but whenever I'm having a release, because I can't do an infinite number of these, obviously, like
Right. Mhm.
they're time involved, and I don't want to burn out. I want to feel like good about doing every one. So yeah, right now they're totally sold. And then I have one more batch I'm working through in January, and then I'll definitely like open it up again and do another run. So, and I pretty much do that with all of our designs. Like we just kind of cycle through. We will open a listing, people can buy, then it takes us a couple months to create them, and then we'll offer something again.
Cool. And it's that slow fashion process. And it sounds like your collaborative process is more than just with the people you're making the garment with, like physically, but you are collaborating on so many levels. It's so very different from our kind of normal everyday approach to clothing, where you're just like, oh, this fits. I guess I'll take that. you know, that's my color. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Are there any specific symbols or beings that really mean a lot to you? Like, are there any plants that consistently show up for you? Or, I'd love to get into your relationship with them and just how do you experience that? What does it mean? How do these spirit beings and kind of the spirits of all these different beings, whether they are tangible physical beings in this world or whether they're just energies that you work with, like what I guess I'm getting into like your spiritual practices and connecting with the spirit world. Can you take us there?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, you know, consider myself, like, I think at the most basic level, like an animist. I have the knowing that everything is alive and everything has its own spirit and intention, and it's always available to us to slow down and listen and be a part of that world. As humans, we're like very much wrapped up in the material scientific reality, but this other way of being is like always there, and really is the bigger world, I think, that encompasses us. We're just kind of unaware beings a lot of the time walking around on this earth. But um and so for me, like working with plants, I definitely try to, a lot of times, just naturally, the plants that I end up carving and printing and working with are plants that I have met in real life. Like if you look at my art, like I'm not carving plants that are native to Puerto Rico or something, like I don't necessarily work with desert plants or tropical plants because I have never been there. Like I don't have a relationship to them. So sometimes there'll be an exception, like maybe I am taking a certain plant medicine and I start to feel really connected to that. Or in this case, like if somebody were requesting something that was really personal to them, I would definitely consider it, working with them. But I usually stick to plants and animals that I feel like I have a personal connection and really like the permission to work with. I'm really like aware of the fact that in a way, like I take their likeness and I'm taking their and like if I'm working, for instance, with Datura, like a lot of people have a strong connection to that plant. And for me to go and work with it and advertise it on my clothing, like I'm kind of claiming the right to work with Datura, and people who want to be connected to Datura might be drawn to my clothing because of that. And it just wouldn't feel good to like do that with a plant that I don't feel like I'm in right relationship with, if that makes sense. So I definitely, that's always on my radar. One of So I obviously love nettle, like that's a given, which lots of people love nettle. It's such a great introductory plant. And for me, the connection there was when I was living in Ohio on this huge property. There was actually wood nettle, which a lot of people don't realize there's a native nettle to the US. It looks very different, but it's stinging, it's still medicinal. And this property had like acres of wood nettle. Actually, I mean, like you would go to a wooded area and as far as the eye could see, it was just all wood nettle. And so I was able to, harvest it there and dry it and use it for teas and infusions and things. And that was basically the first plant that I ever, harvested after being there for a year and like learning about it and learning about the different plants. After a year had passed, like I felt comfortable harvesting wood nettle from there and, using it to nourish my family. So that was where my connection to nettle came from. And then another plant that's been really pivotal for me and still shows up a lot in my work is the Datura flower. So my connection with Datura is through Jimson weed, which grows all over Tennessee. And there was a summer, 2 summers ago, when I was actually going through all of those health problems and a lot of struggle. I was finding this plant everywhere. Like it was just showing up all over. There was one particular experience where my husband and I had gone to this sheep farm, and we were walking around their like paddock where they would keep the animals at night. And the whole area was like barren dirt because there were so many animals that were constantly moving through that area. There was nothing growing, except for whatever reason, there was this one spot that was untouched by all the animals. And it was this massive, like 4.5 foot tall Jimson weed plant. And at the time I didn't know what it was, but I was just like, it was so striking, nothing was alive. And I was like, wow, this plant must be poisonous. I knew enough to be like, there's a reason they haven't eaten this. And didn't know what it was and didn't even find out right away. I just remembered it. And literally like 2 weeks later, saw the same plant in a park. And it was like every week I was seeing it somewhere. And so eventually I was like, what is this? And found out, discovered it was Jimson weed or Datura. And yeah, felt a huge connection with Datura. And one of the first clothing items that I block printed on, it was a Datura print. So yeah, so those are two plants that have been big for me. And I feel like they invited themselves, into my life and made it so that I couldn't ignore them. And that's of course not always the way that I meet or interact. Like sometimes I'm interested and I'm like, hey, hello. Like I'm like, bugging the plant. I'd love to find you. Will you grow in my garden? Like sometimes I'm the one inviting them in. But yeah, that's definitely my relationship with all of that. And so I've been renting at a house for the last year and a half, and I do have a small herb garden here. But it's definitely been a different experience to not like own my home anymore, because I used to have so many perennials and herbs planted that would come up every year. And that's like a really special thing for me. Like early spring and spring for me is like why I get through every year, because I'm like, there's going to be another spring, like it doesn't matter because, those flowers are going to pop up. So like, that's truly what gives me like, the spirit to continue. So I'm very excited to be living in a home that I own again this coming year and kind of start to reinitiate that. And it was cool too, because so we went to this house, it's in the city. No one's like really intentionally gardening there or anything, but there is this little old run over herb garden in the back. And there was a huge, really healthy rosemary plant. And, that's obviously a culinary herb. A lot of people might not think that's a special plant, but something that's really cool about it is it's been used for a long time in European folk rituals. It's been used for smoke bundles and cleansing the house. It's like a really special plant in that way, especially if you're of European descent. Like it would be a great, simple, safe plant for people to connect with. Easy to grow. You can grow it on your windowsill indoors. And so I was really excited to see that because I have a big rosemary bush that I planted here at the house I rent. And my plan is to harvest some rosemary from both plants and bundle that together and use that to like cleanse and bless the new house. So right now I've been kind of on a rosemary kick, thinking about that plant and just feeling really lucky that even in this day and age, I could like go to a new home and wander around the yard and see that plant and feel that it connects me to my ancestors.
That's so special. Yeah. Beautiful. I'd love to hear too, like, I have my own relationship with the turn. I've read all kinds of people's experiences with it. So I'm not going to project myself onto it and just say, like, I'm curious to hear what it what it kind of supported you in or what it helped bring through, like what kind of medicine and experiences did it kind of walk with you?
So yeah, that was really, an amazing time. Like honestly, having that plant show up for me. And for me, it was very like grandmotherly energy and very like loving. I wouldn't say like maybe in the softest, warmest way, but like I felt very enveloped by the respect and love from that plant. Um, and really felt like even as a lot of things in my life were going just badly and were scary and chaotic, it was like this other door was opening up to me. And in connecting with Datora, it led to me actually meeting a woman named Catherine, who I think you've interviewed here, Persephone's Path.
Yeah, and she's done a workshop with us. She's great.
Yeah, I absolutely just have so much admiration for Catherine and have learned so much from her. And so I ended up doing a monthly thing where we would kind of do this like shamanic dreaming class with her and connect with different plant spirits. And so Datura showing up in my life kind of led me down that path and connecting with Catherine and doing some of that work. And from there, kind of opened up to feeling really like welcomed by a lot of poisonous plants and just kind of how misunderstood they are. And I think it was great too, because Catherine is like, even though she works with poisonous plants, she's like such a, in my opinion, a sweet, soft person. And it was really cool for me because I kind of feel the same. And like, there's kind of this edginess to a lot of relationships with poisonous plants. And so it was really great permission of like, this relationship can look how it is for you. And it might be different, than how a lot of other people connect to those plants. And one thing that I really like loved about connecting with Datura, and I think was a great lesson for me that I already was aware of, but just became more solidified, is like the idea that to be connected to the plant world and have relationships with these beings, like it's not just this extractive thing. Like it's not just this, what is this plant useful for? Like in reality, like Datura has no use for me. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna make, you can make a flower essence, of course, but like you're not really like consuming this plant or farming this plant or anything like that, right? And so to a lot of people, like they might pass over it, but in some ways I think that's like the power of poisonous plants, is that they're not just so widely obsessed over, and so they really can be selective and pass under the radar except for who they want to draw the attention in of. And I really definitely felt that way with Datura. It was basically growing like a weed, at these parks. And as per usual, though, I was like freaking out about a weed, at a park. But like there's so much to see there. I like the plants that are looked over. And yeah, I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to say about Datura. Take me a minute. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention, which is true of Datura and a lot of other plants I work with, like another plant I really love is mullein. And my first experiences with mullein were like huge mullein plants growing on the edge of a cornfield, which was like, I'm sure heavily sprayed with glyphosate and everything toxic. And I mean, the field had nothing growing in it because the corn had been harvested and it was just essentially barren earth, which people who maybe don't know or think about it might not think anything of it. Like I grew up in Ohio and saw that all the time, but now I look at that, and I feel like just I want to pull away, because you think, why is nothing growing there? Like there's a reason. But mullein was like absolutely huge, literally right on the edge, growing all along it. I had no clue what it was. It was so soft and fuzzy, like it reminded me of lamb's ear. And so one thing I think is really awesome about poisonous plants and other plants too is that they're kind of these plants that move into these neglected and unwanted spaces, whether they're toxic or just a wasteland, or they're eroding, or they've just been, all the trees have been cut down, or whatever's going on. Like I really love and have so much respect for those first plants that move in and they stabilize the soil. They pull out the toxic nutrients, they put other minerals back into the soil, and eventually other plants are able to move in amongst them. And it's just really cool to think about the cyclical nature of that. And almost, even to look at that, like, even though I have grief over these spaces that have been harmed by humans, I can also see how they're creating a niche. They're creating this pocket for these other plants to come in and thrive. And like they have their own story too, Another great example of that is the mimosa tree, which is super invasive here in Eastern Tennessee, but lines the highways in like June and July. You'll see all the pink flowers. And it's so sad. Like I've talked about that plant a lot in my stories, and I've had people message me and say, oh yeah, my parents said that was a trash tree, was what they would call mimosa trees, because they were just so common and unwanted. And it's really so beautiful. Like the medicine of mimosa is so powerful for your heart. And so that's just another example of, these plants that are kind of overlooked, but there's this whole kind of other timeline and story going on. And I think like getting to know Datura was really like the door opener for me, in viewing and thinking about plants in a way outside of just like something for herbalism, or you know what I mean, something to take for medicine or put on your food.
Totally. I love that. I mean, it's yeah, there's a lot of like plant judgment that goes on, especially around invasives. And like my background is actually in science and in ecosystem assessment and like soil science and all this. And, we had to learn about all the invasive species and like how to manage them. And I was like, well, if they're here, like they're probably, from my perspective, they're not going away. And so like, what are they here to show us too? And I love like the theme I'm seeing in your two shares, especially with Datura and Mullen, are that these plants that thrived despite the conditions around them. And this sounds like, in my own experience, Datura too has been something that helps move through some of those dark nights of the soul where everything's falling apart, or like things that haven't been dealt with are coming up, and it can feel like too much or so much. But then Datura, often gets symbolized as being like the cause of that. But actually, I see it as a partner walking through it of like, no, this is, despite this, we can make it through, you know. And I see that in your story too.
Yeah, I don't feel like anyway, like I don't have there's no plant I could tell you where I'm like, oh, that plant showing up is a really bad sign. Like, in the same way with tarot, like people think about the tower card or the devil card, like I don't it's in the same way. Like those are messengers, they carry us through that time, and like it's really our responsibility, kind of what I was speaking about earlier is like how we tell our stories, is within our power. So yeah, and it was very true for me that the time that Datura really showed up in my life and I was finding it everywhere, she was very much like walking through that time with me, and I've always felt just like very connected to her ever since then.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I know it's funny how over the last few years I've seen so much about deterrence. It's like, yeah, probably because we're going through some really intense stuff. Yeah.
I think so too. It's funny, like I when I first became interested, like there wasn't that much out there, and then I feel like it exploded. And there were so many artists working with Datura. And I mean, it's been really beautiful to see. Like, so I definitely think that's true. And I think that's why Catherine's work is really relevant right now too. Like I definitely think these are companions for the times.
Yes, they are. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about your relationships with the plants and just how they've shown up for you and how you notice them and how you experience them. And yeah. Well, where can people find you and what do you offer? I mean, obviously you offer these beautiful collaborative clothing pieces, but yeah, tell us that.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at sister.nettle. My website, sisternettle.com. Like I said, if you don't use social media a lot or just want to be in the loop, email is a great way to do that. And then I just last month started my Patreon. So that's a new thing I'm very excited about. Doing that and doing some of these more custom garments has been just kind of a like recalibration for me, like a shift after getting through postpartum and feeling like I was just in survival mode for a while. It's been really nice to come back into the arena and be like, what do I want to do? And a big thing for me is as your social media gets bigger and bigger and you have people helping you with customer service and things, you don't always have the time to connect one-on-one with people anymore. So doing some of these smaller batch, really custom pieces, and then doing my Patreon has been a really cool way to just be able to have a space for one-on-one interaction. On my Patreon, I've just been like writing some blog posts about my personal life, sharing just like little behind the scene things. And then depending on what tier you select there, I'm starting to do like paper block prints. So something I didn't really, mention on here is that traditionally, like most people think of block printing as something that happens on paper and is hung on the wall. So that's actually like something I never did. I went right into fabric. And so I'm kind of like Patreon supporting me and learning that there's different inks that are needed, some of the different tools, and really the technique is a little bit different. So that's Patreon's kind of supporting me in figuring that out and stepping into doing some wall art. So yeah.
Cool. Sounds like a fun new direction.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. Well, dear listeners, as always, the links are in the show notes, so you can go check those out. And thank you so much for coming on the show and just sharing your story today. It's so much medicine, and I know it's really landed for some folks. And I'm so excited that we finally got to get you on the show. I feel like first time I came across you was like, oh, she's so aligned, and it just, time just unfolds, and here we are. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. I'm really, really honored. So I appreciate it.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.